Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laser Focus, the deep dive pop culture podcast from Nerdist. My name is Kyle Anderson. Thank you for listening. This week, I am joined by somebody whose work I have enjoyed for quite a long time. I'm sure I've watched your stuff before the pandemic, but definitely during 2020 was like, oh, let's go to the back catalogs of Toy Galaxy, now Secret Galaxy. That's right. I'm here with the host of Secret Galaxy. Almost did it. Dan Larson. Hi, Dan. Nice to have you.
It's okay. You can still call it Toy Galaxy. That's fine.
It's fine. It's still your handle.
If you search for it on YouTube, it still brings us up. So it's all good.
That's good. But yeah, so Secret Galaxy is sort of a, it's exactly what I enjoy, which is people talking at length about cartoons and action figures and video games and just all sorts of the occasional video game. But let me, start. How did you get into that? When did you start the channel? How did you start it? And what was sort of the impetus behind it?
I've been a toy collector my entire life. Secret Galaxy, formerly Toy Galaxy, is a two-person operation. It's myself and producer Greg. We've always been a two-person operation. Maybe in the future we won't be, but we'll see. We'll have to see. Stay tuned for more on that. We'll see where that goes. But yeah, we've always been a two-person operation. Greg and I have been friends for a very long time, long before we started the channel. Our first video went up in 2015. We've been friends going back to the very early 2000s. And we both, the partnership worked out really well because he wanted to make and edit videos, and I had this just trivial knowledge, encyclopedic, trivial knowledge of toys and action figures and cartoons and stuff. I had come up in that sort of community. At the time, I was an aspiring indie comics writer and artist, but I was also a toy seller. I was a dealer who was, buying collections, selling collections, going to auctions, yard sales, flea markets, all that type of stuff. So, Greg would frequently join me at conventions or flea markets where I was set up as a vendor, those types of things. And one day we just got to talking and said, you know what, we've tried to do some sort of indie film projects. We've tried to make some short movies. We've tried to make some short films, but that didn't really pan out because what we found was that the only people we could really count on to really dedicate themselves to a project like that was each other. Everybody else had other priorities. And when you don't pay people, when you don't give people money, you can only ask for so many favors before people just, start to say no, or they say yes and don't show up, and you can't plan anything that way. So we just decided let's see what we can do with YouTube. This is a distribution platform that has never existed before. It's free. There's a very low barrier to entry. Let's see what we can do. And so in April of 2015, we put up our first video. After a few false starts, I thought I could just wing it. I thought, turn the camera on and I'll just go. And that's what we tried. And it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. Some people can do that. I couldn't do it. Maybe I could today, but at the time I couldn't. So as of 2015, we started off as a pretty exclusively toy-related channel, toy action figure reviews. We started getting into sort of the history behind some things, that kind of stuff. And as we grew, we introduced more television shows, comic books, those kinds of things. And then the audience just sort of pushed us in the direction to being more history-oriented and telling those types of stories. And thankfully, the audience, grew and stuck with us and allowed us to grow out beyond that to where we are now, where we encompass, we've talked about choose your own adventure books. We've talked about Clue, the board game. We've tried to go beyond just toys, and that's where the name change came from. Is that I think a very high majority of our audience doesn't even know us as a toy channel anymore. We're just general pop culture, and that's where we wanted to be.
Well, so much of that and the stuff that you cover specifically is like, it hits all the channels. Like there's always some kind of multimedia element to it, as well as the toy element, and then often like games and spin-off material and things like that. And that just always seems to be the case. And most of that stuff that began in the 80s, we talked about a few episodes back about, the deregulation of marketing to children, essentially, and just like how that just sort of skyrocketed and we talked about this is a few episodes back with Eric, which you can go back and listen to, Eric Diaz. But like, because there was so much competition in the marketplace, that actually made good television. Like those cartoons are actually pretty good, really well written, have some really good people behind them, and really, not only just were toy commercials, actually had to be good in order to sell those toys, which I still think is
Sure.
amazing.
Sure. And it's a subjective statement. Good
Well, I
compared to
mean, yeah,
what, you know?
yeah. Compared to like, I don't know, some of those, the Beatles
Yeah,
cartoon from
yeah,
the
yeah.
'60s or whatever.
No, certainly, absolutely, absolutely. Yes, there's a lot more attention being given to character development, consistency of characters, dramatic implications. Fantastic, epic sort of adventures and that type of thing. Absolutely. But admittedly, the target demographic is still like 5 to 12-year-olds.
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 Were there, I mean, because how much, let's start with this. How much of the actual series, let's say you're doing one of these 1 or 2 season cartoons from the '80s and '90s, how much of that do you go back and rewatch when you're doing, or watch for the first time, I guess,
You know
before
what?
you?
It's not important for me to do that.
Hmm.
Most of the things we've covered, I have watched in the past. I've had 40 years to catch up on all this stuff, 45 years to catch up on all this stuff. I've seen it before, so I usually have a pretty good sense of what the thing is. And we don't really get into the plot at all. We don't
Sure.
get into character development. We don't get into those types of things. So it really doesn't matter for me to go through and pick apart every episode, lines of dialogue, those types of things. So even if it's something that I've never seen before, a product that I've never even watched a single episode, I'll watch maybe 2 or 3 episodes just to get a sense of the thing, to see if there's something that really sets it apart that I want to incorporate into the story of that brand or that product. Because normally the stories we're trying to tell are the why. Why does it exist? How was it created? What were the market conditions that facilitated it? Is there anything particularly unique about it? And that's why we're still talking about it here today in 2024, when it came out in 1984.
Right.
Why has it lasted so long? Those are the things that we really like to sink our teeth into. So, quick plot summary. And I usually like to assume that whoever's watching our video is either A, they've already watched the show, so they don't really need me to tell them what the plot is. Or B, they're going to check it out on their own. And so it's like, here, I'm going to give you the general setup. This is the pitch. This is the enough for you to get excited about it. Now go watch it, and then form your own opinion.
You've definitely done some where I'm like, I have never heard of that show, and it's like I was there. I was a kid at the time, so like, that just shows how many there were, going at the.
Well, and I mean, even shows that I would say, oh, I watched that show all the time. Every day after school, G.I. Joe Transformers, G.I. Joe Transformers. I watched those every single day for, years. And then when I actually look at it and I'm like, I only remember like 8 episodes.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not sure I actually saw all 120 episodes or whatever there were. It's rare.
Yeah. The amount of time I think about that too. Like the amount of time I actually spent at the time watching those is incredibly brief, and like, because kids grow so fast and stuff like that. And I'm like, I watched some G1 in repeats, Transformers, but I didn't watch anything like that was made after the first movie came out. And I was just like, I don't even know who these characters are, like
It's
half the
funny
time.
because I've read scientific studies and stuff that say you don't really have memories. Most people don't have memories before like 5 years old. Right? Like those kinds of memories don't really start to set in, other than like how to move your arms and breathe, like who are your parents? Like,
Right.
Okay, that stuff is there, but you don't really have any concrete memories from before that. And so if you're 8 years old watching a cartoon and you think you watched an entire season, a year is 1/3 of your total memories that you have for your entire life. You feel like you've been watching it forever, and it's like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
It's such a high percentage of your life at that point.
I have vivid memories of watching an episode of a lot of things because
of course.
of that exact that situation. Were there any like that stand out to you, shows or movies or whatever, that you're like, you never watched at the time, but you're like, actually this looks pretty cool, I might go check it out? Or are you just kind of like, this is just I don't have time for that kind of thing?
It's this, our success, I'm putting that in air quotes for people that are just listening. It's sort of a double-edged sword. It's like, I, as a person who wants to enjoy media and be entertained by media, I have no interest in looking back. Like I went
Yeah.
through that sort of phase, right? Like, especially in the pre-internet days, 1994, 1995, I'm in college. You don't know that you're ever going to have, unlimited access to these shows ever again. And again, 10 years ago when you're 18 is a long time. And
Yeah.
so, when I'm sitting there in 1995 going, oh my gosh, I haven't seen G.I. Joe since 1986, it's like, well, that wasn't really that long ago, in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, you go through that whole period of like buying up the VHS tapes, or tuning into around the late '90s, early 2000s, Cartoon Network, those sorts of things. Toonami, they start to get those shows, they start rebroadcasting them. You're just digging in. You're like, oh my gosh, I remember all this stuff. I loved all this stuff. Not as good as I remember it, but I still love it.
Yeah.
It's still where I am. And so now let's fast forward another 20, 24 years. And I'm just like, okay, I've seen all this stuff so many times. I've dissected it from every angle. I need new stuff. I need to move on. And as you alluded to just before we went live here, we can't escape this era.
Absolutely. It boggles the mind that in 2024, when so many of these things are turning 40, Transformers is 40 this year, right? And G.I. Joe's 42 or whatever. And it's still like the most recent Transformers movie, which I reviewed, is not good, which was Rise of the Beasts, has a tease for a G.I. Joe film at the end. It's just like, are we really still doing this? Like, because legitimately, who cares about Mask? Like, not that it's not good or anything like that.
I do care. I do like masks.
No, but like, are you going to go see a movie? I won't say, are you going to go see a movie? Will the grand mass public going to go see a movie? Because probably they don't remember that.
For years, no. The general public will have to be, it'll have to be presented to them as a brand new thing that they've never heard of or never seen before. But here's what I'll never understand is, for years, Hasbro was trying to make the shared universe work, right? And they basically did in the Transformers movies, in the Michael Bay Transformers movies. All they had to do was put a little, like my hoodie has on her here. All they had to do was put a little G.I. Joe thing on all the military soldiers. That's all they had to do. And you would have had your G.I. Joe Transformers movie. You could have spun those guys right off. I'll never understand why they didn't do that. I know why they didn't do that, but they could have. And then I think in the fourth movie, maybe somewhere around there, they introduced these sort of mid modes for the Transformers and the toys especially, where they had like flip out guns and stuff and flip out missile launchers. And, they sort of had these, I can't remember what they called them. But I'm like, there's Mask. That's just Mask right there. That's all Mask is like a mid transformation mode for Transformers. The comics got into that a little bit. With the sort of shared world of the Mask vehicles were created by Energon, and from the Transformers technology, that sort of thing. And they almost succeeded in pulling off that whole shared universe. But as far as the movies go, at this point, it's like, why bother?
Yeah.
Transformers has done great, but I just don't know if you're going to be able to pull it off with G.I. Joe.
And like some of those things, like, and to your point about like not wanting to go back, I'll watch old stuff, but it's old stuff I'd never watched before, because it's like, well, it's more just like, well, that's interesting. I spend a lot of my time watching movies that I've never seen, but that are 50 years old or whatever. So, but mostly because like, do I really have time in my life at this point to go back and watch something I've already watched a million times? I don't know if we've ever mentioned this on the show, but like, I think I'm done watching Back to the Future. I don't think I ever need to watch that again. Not that I don't like it. I love it. But I watched it so much as a kid that like...
Well, when you're in your 20s, you just think about how much time, like, oh, if I live till I'm 60, you got so much time, and you have so many fewer responsibilities. Days go by slower. You just got all this time to fill. When you're in your 40s, you're like, I blinked and it's Thursday. Like, where did the whole week go? Like, time just goes by so much faster. And so when you find that 2 hours or that hour and a half or whatever to sit down and actually watch something, it's like, well, do I want to watch that thing I already watched 100 times, can practically recite? Or do I want to watch something new, even if it's 40 years old? Like how do I want to invest that next 90 minutes of my life? And I'm right there with you. I would like to see something new.
Yeah. And even like, so much of, my job, your job is about franchise making. And it's just like, I want to see something that I've never heard of before, that doesn't like come from anything, but could, you know what I mean? Like one of my favorite things actually is all of the kind of crappy, let's say that, rip off Star Wars movies that came out after Star Wars in the like
Sure,
early 80s and stuff. Cause they're just like, they were just trying to make a buck, and they're
of
like,
course.
let's see what we can do. And like, I find those really interesting because they're trying to recapture that level of fun and world building without having anything else to go with it. And they're just like an interesting time capsule, but like, it's still at its heart, it's franchise. It's like it's popcorn movies, it's like stuff that
Sure.
would never go anywhere. Yeah. So what are you watching these days?
It's funny. We're in a completely different media landscape at this point, and there's a lot of implications to that. A lot of what gives these 40-year-old properties their perseverance through today is this idea that we all grew up with them, right? Like we had
Yeah.
there weren't many options. It's 3 o'clock. What are you going to do? Well, I have a TV with 3 channels, so I'm either going to watch the news, the cartoons, or soap operas. So I guess I'm watching cartoons, and that's that experience that this whole generation grew up with. And as we get into the 90s, into the early 2000s, you start to get cable TV and things start to fracture. The audience starts to fracture as people sort of compartmentalize into different viewing experiences and growth experiences. Their life experiences are starting to get different. And so today it is so much worse. There's almost no shared experience
No.
as far as media is concerned. And so I just finished watching, I think it was 8 episodes on Amazon Prime, Paramount Plus ish. It's the Bass Reeves Lawmen, Bass Reeves show. Bass Reeves.
Oh yeah. I wanted to watch that. I didn't watch
Old
it.
West. There's some discussion as to whether or not he's actually the inspiration for the Lone Ranger or not.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of similar elements in there. And so it's one of those shows where I was like, oh man, this is so good. I really enjoyed this. I got to it late. I think it's a year or two old, maybe. And I'm like, man, this is so fantastic. I just burned through these episodes and that's it. There's nothing else, and I'm halfway through I think it's also on Amazon Prime, the League of Their Own TV series. And it's like, well, that's got like 8 episodes. It's unfinished as far as I know, because one of the writer's strike or something killed it. I don't know what killed the actual series, but it's, that's the end of that. And it's like, okay, well, there's all this stuff out here to watch. It's like, how do you even select? How do you even pick? How do you even know where to point your attention? And do you factor in the fact that it's not finished? It's never going to be finished. There's never going to be another season. There's never going to be another, should this have been a movie? Did it get pushed to streaming when it should have been a movie? Is this a movie that should have been a streaming show? It's just like, there's so much stuff. And most of the time, like a lot of people, I just find myself sitting there like, oh, I want to watch something, scroll through the Netflix menu for about 20 minutes and go, that's it for me.
Yeah.
I didn't watch anything. I just scrolled through the thumbnails.
Yeah, totally. And that so much is why I like, when I don't have anything particular to watch, I'll just put something on YouTube, because it's just like, well, that's much easier. Weirdly enough. But yeah, like the streaming landscape is such that they don't care, they being the streamers don't care what we watch as long as we watch something. And so they don't put any like emphasis on any one thing, because they don't want to be like, occasionally you'll have those like the Stranger Things or like the Game of Thrones or something like that, which is still things everybody has to watch, but like they're so brief and like, they take so much time in between. Like, I don't think the second season of House of the Dragon is even going to come out for another year or more. So it's just like, what is, you know what I mean? Like people lose interest, I guess, or like,
and it's a weird way that, there was, schoolyard telephone game, right? Like you weren't watching something, you started watching it because everybody at the cafeteria, everybody at lunch was watching a thing or talking about a thing. I think for me that applied more to like comics. TV only had so much choice, but comics, it was like, oh, I'm not reading, Green Lantern, but this guy's talking about it. It sounds pretty cool. Maybe next time I'm at the shop, pick up an issue of Green Lantern. I'm watching, I think I'm 4 episodes into Blue-Eyed Samurai, which is fantastic. Highly recommended so far. I don't know how it ends. Please don't spoil it for me. But, like people have been talking about that thing for weeks, months even, I think, saying it's great, it's great, it's great, it's great. But even that's not enough to get me to watch it. It's like at some point you just have to figure it out on your own and say, well, I'm gonna give this thing a shot.
Yeah.
and that's how you find stuff now. Like, I guess I'll take a crack at this one.
Yeah, so much of it too is like mood, because you're just like, sure, or like I was never in the mood to watch Succession, so I just never watched Succession, and I know it's good. I'm
Yeah,
well aware that
yeah,
it's good,
sure.
but I didn't come up with this phrase. It's a well-known phrase, but a friend of mine used to say this all the time about things like that. It would just go, I can't get involved. It's just like, it's just laissez-faire attitude when it comes to TV because there's too
Yeah,
much. And it's
yeah,
just like, I don't have time for this.
yeah, yeah. My wife has an issue with it, especially since pandemic. She doesn't want to watch or get involved in anything that is going to be too heavily traumatic is not the right word, but she doesn't want to see bad things happen to good characters.
Sure.
So like I'll pre-screen things, and she'll be like, "Does the horse die?" And I'll be like, "The horse makes it through fine."
Right.
You can check it out. It's just too much. There's just too much of the real world. You're like, she wants complete and total escapism that
Mm.
is a guaranteed happy ending.
Yeah, which is so hard to find. It's so weird because my wife does that. My wife does that too, where like it, just doesn't feel like watching these really heavy things. And then without me, because I can't watch it, she watches The Handmaid's Tale, and I'm just like, how do you do that? Because that's like, she's
Yeah, I
like, no,
guess
it's really
technically
good,
that's
but
enough for anybody. If
I
you
guess
just
so.
have
Yeah, that's her
one,
one thing. But she's definitely, and I don't know, like, is the opposite of us, where like she will watch the same thing that she's watched just because there's a million episodes, and she doesn't have to think. She's like, well, she
Mhm.
just this weekend got finished watching Parks and Rec for like the 30th time, or
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
how many, but
yeah.
it's just like,
Cheers is that for me.
yeah,
Cheers.
it's like there's 100 more than 100 episodes, and it's fun, and you just go, okay, well, this is what
Yeah,
I background noise.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's a tough one because like so much of like my job is to watch some of the newer Disney Plus shows, and I've talked about it on the show before, but like I just get so burnt out on those because like if I'm not connecting with it, everything in my body says stop watching this, you don't like it, and yet
Yeah.
I must continue because I
Well,
must
so
know.
I'm sure what you deal with is the same thing I deal with is like I have to be informed about the thing because
Yes.
it's important in the community that I run in. It's important for me to remain an authority on the thing, and so I need to know what is going on. And as much as I want to say I like the thing, I love the thing, I have an opinion, I just don't have an opinion about most of it anymore.
No.
And so it usually breaks down to yes, I saw the latest thing. I did. I watched it. I don't have an opinion of it anymore. It is just
Yeah.
a thing I watched. And that's not good. That's not a good review.
No. Well, there's so much where you're just like, I forget that I watched it. Sometimes I'm like, oh
Oh,
yeah, I did
sure.
watch that.
Yeah.
Like, if it doesn't stick with you, but that again is like no one is putting. This sounds very old man with a cloud yelling at somewhere. There was a sentence, but like they're not putting any like they're not making other than Andor, which I think you've mentioned that you enjoyed Andor.
Wonderful. Yeah.
It's one of the best things that's come out of Star Wars, I think, ever. But other than that, it's just like, well, this seems like even I do not have enough information to understand what's going on in this thing.
Yeah.
like the Book of Boba Fett having a stealth 2-episode, the Mandalorian arc is just like, why did you do this to us? Like,
So this is the thing. This is a great tie back to how we opened up this conversation. Is there's stories behind all that? How did that happen? Like
yeah,
was it just such compelling audience data that they were like, oh, the audience wants a 2-episode side mission featuring Mando? Then that wasn't it. That was marketing. Marketing was like, you better put some Mando in this. And they were like, well, we don't want to, and they're like, you better. Like, I get it. I get it. It's tough to be impartial when you look at that sort of thing, but you
yeah,
have to, because you have to be able to look at it from the business side of things and say, well, that makes sense, and I need to be able to communicate that to the audience and say, hey, part of the reason action figures got smaller is because there was an oil embargo, in the 1970s. And you go, I never thought about it that way, but that's true.
yeah. Well, like nowadays in the action figure market, like 6-inch seems to be like the version, but like when I was, GI Joe was 3 inches or whatever, Star Wars was like 3 or 4 inches, and that was DC Superpowers was another one that I had a million of, and they were all really small. And so now it's like now when I see like something like Hasbro does the vintage collection as well as the Black Series, and the vintage, I'm like, those are too small, and yet they're the correct size, and I just don't. It's like it's a very strange world.
There's a weird psychological thing that I think a lot of people have sort of independently come to the conclusion that proportionately the 6-inch action figures are to you as an adult what the 4-inch action figures were to you as a 10-year-old,
That
as
totally
far as
makes sense.
the size of them being in your hand. I don't think the math actually works out, like if you
Right.
actually did, the math and whatever, but that, brain wise, that's sort of how it works out.
When you can look at like the pricing too of those things, which I think is really funny, because like obviously a lot of 6-inch figures are really well detailed and everything like that. But if they're smaller than that, they cost less. And if they're a foot tall, then they cost less. And it's always just like, well, that is really interesting, because it is all just about, I look at like, I was a collector as a kid, took many, many years off. And then I have lost my mind at this point, just collecting toys. Because they're so fun, but they are making them for us, the people who bought toys as kids, and now they're better than they were when we were kids. And but I look at them and it's just like, why is the one that I want the most expensive one? And it's like, that's why. It's because I want it. Like,
yeah, no, they got you right in the crosshairs. They got you exactly targeted. They know where your wallet's hidden. Let's go for him.
Totally. But you do have to, this is something that like, cause you have made this your whole career at this point, like, which is awesome, but like, and you've been collecting forever, but at what point do you go, I can't get involved. Like some of these lines, you're like, you know what? It's nice, but it's not for me. What is that? Where is the point for those type of things? Even within like, like Marvel Legends, for example, I have a million of those, but it's like, I don't buy the MCU ones, not because they're not nice, but it's just like, I have to draw the line somewhere. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely. Yeah. One of the things I also do is I write for Toy Collector magazine. That's collector with drop the E. It's just collector with an R at the end.
Yeah.
Kind of like Toys R Us. And I think it was 2 issues ago, I wrote about my rules, my new collecting rules, which they're just for me. You can, if you want to adopt them for your own collecting habits, that's great. But they're my collecting rules that I set up for myself to protect myself from myself.
Right.
Because there are so many cool things out there and they're all very expensive and the prices are always going up and they're always adding more cool things. And the older this demographic gets and the further we get away from any of those brands being relevant to anybody younger, the more those licenses start to free up and they get a little bit looser and more companies are embracing them. So, 15 years ago, only Playmates had the Ninja Turtles license.
Right.
Now there's like 8 different companies all producing collector grade, collector specific, Ninja Turtle figures. And so you got to step back and say, okay, well, how into Ninja Turtles am I? How far on this do I want to go? Do I want video game versions? Do I want movie versions? Do I want cartoon versions? Which cartoon versions do I want? Do I want comic book versions? There's pretty much everything you could possibly dream of. So for myself, I instituted a set of 10 rules. And they're in that issue of Toy Collector magazine to say, look, okay, if it's over $50 for one figure, I got to step back on that. I got to be careful. Seek ideal versions of characters. I'm long past the point. I used to be a Captain America completist. I wanted every Captain America figure that had ever been made, and that was real easy before Captain America First Avenger came out.
Yeah.
And since then, there's been like 10 or 15 new Captain America figures every single year. And you either got to focus on just Captain America or you got to say, okay, well, I'm only going to get Captain Americas that meet this specific criterion. So for me, one of my rules is I'm seeking ideal versions.
Yeah.
If I find the new ideal version, previous versions got to go. I can't have this bin full of 12 different versions of the same character that I never actually put on my shelf. Like, well, what am I doing with all this stuff? So it has forced me to make rules, whereas before I would have just said whatever my heart desires, that's what I'm going to get myself.
I had this rule with Black Series figures there similarly, where I was like, I like the look of Mandalorian armor, which you and I can can commiserate on. Do you have the largest collection of Boba Fett action figures in the world?
That's up for debate. There's at least 2 other people who I know who have multiple hundreds, but they will not give me an actual count, so I don't know.
So, but you're up there in the Boba Fett.
I am in contention.
In contention, which I am not. But and then once the show The Mandalorian came out, it was just like, well, this is just everybody's putting out just a million Mandalorian armors. Like, so I even had to draw the line there. Like, I think I might be done. Just because, like, how do you...
Even if you just focus on Boba Fett, and
Right.
not even all the other Mandalorian, no Bo-Katan, no Pre Vizsla, none of these other guys, just Boba Fett, you're still you're still neck deep.
They will not stop making Boba Fett's, and
No.
it's even though the aforementioned Book of Boba Fett I did not think was a particularly good show, they're still selling 75 million Boba Fett figures a
Oh,
year,
sure. Yeah, no.
different styles, different, whatever. I'm always like, what color scheme is this? I don't know. Like, different sizes, different whatever. But um, so okay, so that's a really good way to do it. Like, what your ideal version of it? Does your ideal version of a character change with time though? Like, you may have, okay, this is my ideal Wolverine or whatever.
Sure.
Wolverine's a bad example because again, they make a million of those. But like, um, does what you look for in a figure change, and do you take that into account as well?
Of course, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
technology is going to advance, and sometimes it goes too far to a point where I'm actually not interested. For years, hand or finger articulation, toe articulation. It was all about put as many joints as you can into the figure.
Yeah.
And to me, that went too far. And now the figure is just ugly and it doesn't actually pose well. And you just have joints for joints' sake. And they don't actually do anything. They just add to the point count. So you can put that big starburst on the box that says 83 points of articulation. This figure is practically liquid. It has so many points of articulation.
Yeah.
But that's not fun, and that's not what I wanted. And
No.
so I kind of stepped away from a lot of that collecting for a long time. But Hasbro in the last couple of years has been rolling out this pinless action figure technology, so you don't see those pins sticking out of the joints across their brands. And a lot of the imports have been doing this facial printing technology, which does much more realistic likenesses, but it also does very good faces for comic book versions and cartoon versions of characters. It just allows for more color and accuracy and detail in the faces. And so every time a new version is announced, I'll compare it to what I have on my shelf. And, one of my rules is if I'm not going to display it on my shelf immediately, then why am I buying it? Am I buying it just to put it in a drawer? I don't collect in package. Everything I have is open. I don't collect for investment's sake. I want it because I like action figures. I like toys. I like to mess with them. I like to pose them on my shelf. I like to take pictures and post them on Instagram, and just indulge in them that way. So if I'm going to put it in a bin, what's the point? Why spend that money?
That is something too that I like. I'm also a take them out of the box. That's the only way you can pose them, and that's how they look cool.
I don't regret anybody who doesn't. That's fine. There's lots
absolutely.
of
But the thing, like, there for a while, Hasbro was trying to, especially with the Marvel Legends, was like, well, we'll just put a picture, and no plastic, basically, which I thought was great for the environment. But so many people complained about that because they want to keep it in the box. And there has to be some middle ground, and I'm not sure what that middle ground is, but like,
I think they could facilitate both. I don't. Again, there's behind the scenes stories there. There's tax breaks for having environmental programs and stuff in place. So I'm sure that was part of it. I appreciate whether it was a shallow attempt at a tax break or not. I appreciate the commitment to trying to save the planet, to help the planet in some way. I understand the irony of saying we don't want to put this clear thin plastic on a package that has plastic inside it. Yes, I'm collecting plastic things. I get it, but when we look back to vintage action figures and other things that people collect in package, like there's a point where a lot of that vintage stuff that didn't have windows either. When you buy G.I. Joe in the box, it's just the package art, vintage Ninja Turtle vehicles and stuff. That was all. There was no windows or anything on that stuff. Yes, the figures were blister carded. They were also smaller, cheaper, and cost less to make, So I get it. A lot of people had the problems with Amazon shipping the wrong figure in the box. You open it up, it's the wrong figure. Yeah, that shouldn't happen. And that's either Amazon's fault or Hasbro's fault. That's somebody else's fault. It shouldn't happen. But I also think there's more than enough distribution and fulfillment technology available that they could say, if you want to order this figure in a bubble mailer, we'll send it to you in a bubble mailer.
I'm in.
I would be fine with that. I'd be fine with that.
Yeah,
I've joked for years.
I've definitely purchased a lot of in my. I'm a big X-Men collector. That's my big collection is my X-Men collection. And so there are older figures that I want that there's no way I'm paying new prices for because they're $1 million. But I will pay used out of box prices depending on what it is, of course. And it takes up so much less room in the mailbox. Like there's so much, and I know the secondary market is ruining everything. Let's take that as read, but, getting a tiny little thing with everything you want in it is, to me, like a much better use of uh mail space and, like, resources or whatever. Like you
Sure.
said, bubble mailers, like, just chuck it in a bubble mailer. And there should, you're right, there should be a version for us who want to have the thing without the box.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I felt really bad, and I felt like, I have to believe them when they say it affected sales to the point where, they decided to turn it around.
Yeah.
To me, that speaks to, and I don't have any access to any numbers or any data or anything like that, but to me, that indicates just how very small the actual market is for that stuff.
Yeah.
If the amount of noise that was made on Twitter and YouTube made that much of a difference that they turned around because it was actually affecting sales, well, that tells me that it is a very, 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 very small market.
And that really, like, we've been talking about it this whole time, but, like, they are catering to us, and not just, like, kids today don't
Kids
play
today.
with toys like that. They play with video games, they play with their phones, they play with, a million other things that we would never even think are toys. It's only being made for us. And at a certain point, why am I being catered to? Stop catering to me. Like, I know I'm the one buying all these things, but
I hate to turn this into an advertisement for Toy Collector Magazine, but in the latest issue of Toy Collector Magazine, I wrote about exactly this, about this idea that, we grew up in a golden age of action figures where all of this stuff was brand new. And, the deregulation of the Reagan administration allowed for all these things to happen, 30-minute cartoons for toys and action figures. And you were seeing this kind of engineering and innovation and, globalization of different products. Things were coming in from Japan that were just blowing our 10-year-old minds, Voltron and Robotech and all these sorts of things, Transformers, and then now we're in this golden age of just gluttony of whatever you could possibly want. Again, how do you want your Ninja Turtles? 2 inches, 5 inches, 10 inches? Do you want them realistic? Do you want them cartoony? Like any sort of variation of Ninja Turtles you can think of, you can get now. But there's an end point to that, because a lot of this stuff is super old and kids do not care. And so when you combine these grandpa brands with physical things, physical objects that kids just aren't into, where then is the next golden age? Can there be a next golden age for action figures? Are they still here in 40 years? When I was a dealer, my wife and I would go around to auctions and flea markets and yard sales, all that sort of thing. And we watched, basically, so we're talking, the sort of early 2000s, early 2010s. We watched as the railroad generation, the generation that used to collect and build scale railroad stuff, died. Literally. They just died because they got old, because they grew up in the 40s and 50s. It's the baby boomer generation who grew up with that sort of thing, and it was their dream to have all these railroad stuff. And so you'd go to an auction and it would say toys, and you would just see tables full of N scale, HO scale, all this stuff, railroad stuff. And over the months, over the years, the prices just come down, 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 because all of this product is just flooding the market and there are no new customers for it. Nobody wants it. And that's how I look at action figures right now. Like a lot of us who have kids, grandkids, whatever at this point, they're looking at this stuff and saying, I don't want dad's weird old stuff. Like, I try to think about, like, if you were 10 years old in 1985, 40 years ago was 1945. Would you have wanted anything that your parents were talking about at the time? Oh, hey, kids, do you want my Hopalong Cassidy toys? No. Get out of here, you weirdo.
Yeah. I remember my grandparents and even my dad, like, talking about Howdy Doody and all this stuff. And it's like, and I got a ton of, like, I got a bunch of hand-me-downs from my older cousin, which were all like the Masters of the Universe toys. But pre that, why would anybody, like, there was, my grandparents had these old cowboy, they weren't even toys. They were just like plastic, like, statues essentially that you just would set up and they don't even move. And that was like, oh, these were the coolest things. And we just like drag them along the carpet. It's just like, well, I guess that was what everybody likes, but that's, that's nostalgia. And that's the problem with nostalgia is that, like, you think you need it. And it doesn't help that the world is terrible right now, but, like,
it's escapism for sure.
It's escapism, but it's like, this thing when I was a kid, it made me happy, so I'm going to have it. And these are better than and, like, this is a cry for help essentially. Like it's a
Listen,
self-fulfilling thing because like I'm doing it. It does make me happy briefly. And then I go, yeah, but do I need these things? Like it's a
no, you
real
don't. No, you
push
don't. You
pull.
don't need them. You want them, and that's
Right.
okay. It's okay to indulge. Look, hey, I'm the perpetrator number one. Like
Right.
I am the person that's doing most of this and indulging the most. But what I try to stress to people is, and this goes again back to themes that we've talked about in our show on YouTube on Secret Galaxy and Toy Galaxy and those sorts of things. Is like we can talk about the sort of societal experiment that took place between the years of 1980 and 1988 before the kid vid rules were rolled out during the Clinton administration, late Bush into the Clinton administration, where they started to require a certain amount of educational content to balance off the fact that the rest of it was basically just a commercial for toys and stuff and had no value for kids and for their experience in front of the TV. Um, we can talk about that from an actual, sort of objective standpoint. Was this a weird societal experiment that took place? Not intentionally. I'm just, you know, basically using that terminology to describe it. And how did that affect this generation that grew up with that? Why can't we separate ourselves from these brands? Why won't we let them go? Why are we made happy when we still indulge in these things? But what I try to stress to people is you can look at that stuff objectively and say,
Right.
yes, I was a part of this. Yes, I helped it happen, it occur. I was a victim of it, but it's still fun to me.
Right.
For me, at the end of the day, most of the brands, most of the mythologies, most of the characters and stuff, I don't really care that much about. Yeah, I'm wearing a G.I. Joe hoodie. I got this for hosting PulseCon. What do you want? Like,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, I'm a fan of action figures, the physical objects, the engineering. I'm fascinated by the different details, the way that people explore different genres and sorts of things. So I can separate the characters from the physical object. But I'm also aware enough to know that this might be a temporary thing that exists as a piece of pop culture, stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it can go and may go the way of railroads, of train sets and stuff, where in 40 years, we're looking at it as a weird sort of novelty. There's people who do have YouTube channels, just like there are still people making railroads today, but it is such a small percentage of the collecting world because the rest of the world has moved on because it was just a temporary thing.
What do you think?
I don't mean to bring everybody down.
No. Look, that's half of the show is bringing it down because that's the way it is. But some of these other like boutique sort of or smaller studios that are they maybe have licensed characters, but a lot of them are doing their own thing. I'm thinking of like, and both of these are ones that I learned about first on your yearly countdown show that you do on your second channel. But like Spiro does Animal Warriors of the Kingdom, which are awesome. And Boss Fight Studio has a bunch of other, things, but they're more recent Saurozoic Warriors, which are just like, those are what Ninja Turtles would have been, or Dinosaurs if they'd have made good Dinosaurs toys. Do you, like, for people like you who are just, I love action figures, the actual thing, is that the wave of the future? Do you think these licensed things are kind of gonna go the way of the dodo and it's going to be more these non-licensed things?
I do think so, and I think that's good and right and healthy, and that is what will allow for a future of these things. If you're a 10-year-old kid right now, I don't know how you even get interested in a mountain of, and just pick a character: Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, a 40, 50-year-old mountain of pre-existing action figures. I don't know how you engage with that. But if there's something brand new, something that appeals to you, something that is unique that you can call your own, that weird old dad doesn't have in the basement, that is definitely more of a future. So I wish that Boss Fight's Saurozoic Warriors and Spiro's Animal Warriors of the Kingdom and those kinds of new things could reach that younger audience.
Yeah.
But without, the media, cartoon, comic books, those sorts of things, something that can get onto that, electronic device, whether it's a tablet or a phone or whatever, to put those characters in front of kids. At this point, honestly, it's just Fortnite. If they can get into Fortnite, they're fine.
Which they have. They've made Fortnite figures, like, which I thought was surprising. It's like, are kids really going to buy this? And maybe they aren't. I don't know if they still are making the Fortnite figures, but Um,
Well, I just mean to actually catch their attention.
no, 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 I know, but
If a
like,
kid had
yeah,
never heard of Sorzoic warriors before, but suddenly they saw this cool, Viking brontosaurus or whatever, they might be like, "Oh, hey, that's cool." And then they go to Target and see the figure, and they go, "I'd like to buy that figure
yeah.
because I saw it in Fortnite. That's my main."
I mean, honestly, yeah. um, which you're mentioning Ninja Turtles and all the different things. There's that brand new movie that just came out last year, which is quite good. I actually finally saw it, and
Fantastic. I loved it.
it's
Yeah.
really good. The action figures for kids that are based on those are like $8 at Target. Like,
Yeah.
and I think it's like, Ninja Turtles wasn't the beginning of the rush, obviously, but that was the beginning of my like, oh my God, look at all of these shows that are coming out and they all have toys and I want to have them all. And I think it's like, I don't know, it's sort of like, we need stuff like that. And if it's a movie or if it's a show or whatever, and Ninja Turtles has been trying for years and years to like recapture the youth market. They're not, the comics might be going for darker and older, but and I think that's the way you got to do it. Like, if you want to capture children's imaginations, you got to still gear it towards them. And that's part of what I think. Like, if they were making as cool, Hasbro or various other, companies were making these cool toys that were based on things for kids, I'd still buy them if they were cool. And it
course.
doesn't, and that's why like stuff like X-Men 97, the cartoon that's coming out, I'm like, on the one hand, I'm like, hey, that's cool. But it's like, is that for kids or is that for us to show our kids? or for us to bore our kids with, like
There's some opportunity to share that experience with the kids, but it is definitely more parent driven than kid driven, I think. I'm sure Hasbro has all kinds of data on which characters. I mean,
sure.
Spider-Man has been hugely popular.
Oh, forever, yeah.
For the last 2 decades since the movies really started, and that I think is driven by the shared experience of the movies. That does harken back to us being stuck watching 3 channels on broadcast television. There's only one movie out, right? Like, there's the movie theater in town and everybody's going to see this one Spider-Man movie experience. Whereas I know that my 5 and 3-year-old nephews are into YouTube characters that I couldn't even tell you about right now.
Yeah. There's something about a toilet I've heard.
It's talking trucks and stuff. I don't know,
Yeah,
man.
I don't know.
I can't blaze in the trucks or whatever, blaze in the muscle machines, whatever they're called.
It's probably that. It's probably blazing
But,
the trucks.
like Bluey and all this other stuff. Like, the kids are into what the kids are into. And I think because we have been catered to for so long, we just assume that all of these brands are going to be transgenerational. They're gonna, Ninja Turtles has managed to reinvent themselves several times by continuing to stay as young as they can and reinvent themselves for the younger audience. Transformers also have been successful. And Star Wars to a certain extent. Marvel is trying, but Marvel's in a real weird spot right now.
Yeah.
But it's those ones that have been able to reinvent themselves for the younger audience, I think, that have really been able to hold on and persist as long as they have, and will continue to persist into the future. Whereas others are going to just, I don't know, fade away.
Yeah. It's definitely a strange period of time. I'm sitting here in my office looking at my work office collection when I have my other one at home. It's like, it's ridiculous.
You gotta have your desk guys, right?
Yeah, my desk guys. I'm showing you the Crystar on my desk, which is one of the best figures. I have just the one. I only need the one. I very rarely double dip on figures, mostly just because why would I need more than one? But
of course, why would you?
Funny story about children. We had some people over last, I guess it was 4th of July, and my friends have kids who are like 4 and 5, and they went into my office, and I have millions of action figures in there, and they were like, they were asking me who everybody was, which I thought was adorable. They recognized Spider-Man and Batman. The end. Like, they didn't know any of these other characters, and it was just like, and there's a lot of
Optimus Prime. Do you have Optimus Prime in there?
I didn't have one in there.
Okay.
I'm a Beast Wars guy, so I had all the Beast Wars guys out. But
one of those, I got.
So I had Optimus Primal, but and they were just always like, "Is he scary?" And it's like, "Well, no, he's a good guy." This one is scary. Like, it's just sort of like, I mean, they don't know who Swamp Thing is or anything like that.
Yeah.
No. Anyway, I think it's really funny, like the ones that permeate the Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, I think are going to be the 3 that last forever.
Sure.
or the ones that at least last the longest. And like so many of these other, I don't even think Iron Man's probably going to last like that much longer.
Yeah,
In
it's
the
interesting,
zeitgeist.
and a lot of this stuff I don't really have an opinion on because, or at least I don't have a publicly stated opinion. I have my opinions, but I want to keep them to myself
I
because,
understand.
unfortunately, a lot of times in this industry, when you express an opinion, then that sort of becomes an endorsement for a thing. And, oh, well, Dan said he liked the Spider-Man movie. That means he loves Hasbro and Marvel and whatever else. Or
Sure.
Dan didn't like the latest episode of Book of Boba Fett. That means he hates Kathleen Kennedy. It's like, well, those two things have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah, totally.
Um, but yeah, as far as like, characters that can push forward and will continue to connect with kids, it's it's hard to predict what they're going to actually be attracted to and what they're going to actually recognize and what things they're going to connect to. I
Yeah.
think, this next James Gunn Superman movie that's coming out next year, I think 2025.
Mhm.
Does that set Superman up for his next 10, 20 years of relevance,
Yeah.
and keep that character going on into the future? I consider myself an objective observer. I just want to sort of see where the thing goes, like I'm just here for the experience of watching the history play out in front of my eyes. If Hasbro does a bad thing subjectively, if Hasbro does a good thing subjectively, I just want to watch what happens, because when I was 10 years old and I was buying these things, when I was getting excited about action figures, and that's what was consuming my every waking thought, I didn't really have an opinion about Hasbro.
Totally.
I just liked the things. And so if Hasbro does something good and they make a gajillion dollars, okay. And if Hasbro does something bad and they lose a gajillion dollars, okay. It's got nothing to do with me. I'm just here to witness the history and to see how the story plays out in my lifetime.
You're separating the art from the artist.
All
But
of
in
it,
this case,
yeah.
the
To a certain extent, because that's my job, right? Like, we
Yeah.
don't like to consider ourselves journalists in our
Sure.
show, but more and more we find ourselves in that position where, Greg and I are trying to turn over the stones, figure out what the real story is, dig through the mess of Wikipedia and all the articles that only did the research enough to quote Wikipedia.
Right.
There's some things that got to be straightened out. We both take pride in what we've been able to put out there in some of these episodes, as far as presenting some new information, or at least presenting the information in a new way that tells the story in a way that people maybe hadn't thought about before.
That is great. Thank you so much for. Did I have something else? Oh, I did. So thank you very much for joining us. We will, I'll let you go here shortly, but I did want to ask: is there a line, or even just a few figures that have come out recently that are under the radar that you think more people like get on board with this stuff? Whether it be licensed or otherwise, or you're just like, this is my favorite new thing or something I've really
I
enjoyed.
probably would have mentioned both Swords of Oak Warriors and Animal Warriors of the Kingdom if you hadn't previously mentioned them. Mythic Legions and Cosmic Legions from Four Horsemen are getting better, bigger and bigger all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think in general they are still sort of like a unheard of sort of brand. And because there's such a sort of specific audience for those toys. Beyond that, I can't really. I mean, there's lots of little things, but so many of them are things that I love and I collect, and I can't wait to see where they go. But I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of one where I'm just like, everybody get on this right now. It's the best new thing.
Well, I guess that's good. I guess there's so it's not just like a one horse.
I think
race?
That's me just being like a hummingbird,
I
like
understand.
I'm just flittering around like, what's this? Oh, what is that over there? Oh, that one looks cool. That guy's got a skull. That guy's got a skeleton, a whole skeleton, I'm just everywhere, all over the place. I mean, if my Instagram is Toy Galaxy, at Toy Galaxy, and I just, there's some certain themes. I love translucent figures. I love Boba Fett, this sort of thing. I love War Duke. But
you won't shut up about War Duke. That's something like, so G.I. Joe, I mean, I appreciate that the G.I. Joe figures are doing so well. That's one's not for me. And I've never been on board with Dungeons and Dragons, any of it. And so I'm just like, it's a neat looking figure, I guess, but I can't get involved. But It is a neat looking figure, I will say.
Yeah, yeah. It's just one of those weird, to me, obscure things that I was never really that into Dungeons and Dragons as a kid. Wasn't really that into the show, but that figure, Warduke, was just like, what a gorgeous character design. What an absolutely absurd character design.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense, but it's so cool. It practically looks like a 10-year-old created it, you know.
Oh, I mean, that helmet alone is just like,
All of
who
it.
drew this?
It's like half naked, you know,
Yeah.
like it draws from that like barbarian era, and it's got He-Man elements to it, sci-fi stuff going on. It's just a fantastic thing, and it's one of those characters that I was like, well, it's 2023. If nobody's tapped into this in the last 40 years, then nobody's going to. And then they did, and I'm just like, I'm in love. I'm enamored with it.
And they keep putting them out in different sizes. Like I keep seeing like different versions of that same figure out, like different lines or whatever. But like that,
yeah.
I think it's standing the test of the shelves or whatever you want to call it.
Very small, very specific market.
Yes. And I think that's what everyone at home can take away for this episode, is that we're talking about things that are very small and very specific. Dan, you've mentioned it a few times, but where can people find you and your show and your work on the internet and elsewhere?
The main thing is every Thursday at 5:00 Eastern Standard Time, Secret Galaxy, we put out a new episode on YouTube. You can find us, search for Secret Galaxy, search for Toy Galaxy. We do have a second channel called Dan Larson. That's more for just the sort of like just general miscellaneous stuff. We don't have a real regular upload schedule there. Just kind of occasionally we'll throw something up. And then Instagram is at Toy Galaxy. And then I'm currently locked out of my primary Twitter account, so I may never get back into that. So I'm not going to promote that right now. But you can also find us on Patreon at Toy Galaxy as well. In fact, we're going to be shifting over soon. We'll be shifting over some one video a month. We'll be shifting over to Patreon just to try to break free of this stupid YouTube algorithm system.
Wouldn't know what you mean by that. YouTube is overlords. It's overlords upon overlords. That's who we serve these days.
It's all robots. It's all robots back there.
Yeah, folks, you can follow me. I have long left I left Twitter when it was still called Twitter because I was done feeling sad all the time. But you can follow me on Instagram, functional_nerd. You can also follow me on Letterboxd, as I have been going voraciously over there, Kyle_Anderson. And if you are a fan of listening to me talk about things, is that a good segue? There's a video. I have a long form Doctor Who video coming out on our YouTube soon. I will say more about that when it is more out, but I'm very excited for people to watch that. Dan, thank you again for joining me on the show.
Thank you for asking me on.
Absolutely. Thank you all for listening. I've been Kyle Anderson. Join me again next time on Laser Focus when my guest will be a different person. Bye-bye. Laser Focus is a production of Nerdist Industries and Legendary Digital Networks. It was produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kyle Anderson. For more, visit nerdist.com.